I want to share 4 ways we can use smart planning and a good understanding of cumulative effects to minimize the amount of damage and human suffering that happens from flooding. It's been a really wet spring in North America. There's been big storms in the American Midwest. In eastern Canada, they combined heavy rains with fast spring snowmelt. And out on the western side of the continent, there's been an atmospheric river going on for a few months. First it was in California. That caused a tremendous amount of damage. It's going to take maybe years to clean up from. And now in British Columbia, many places in southern BC where I am are in an evacuation notice. People are sandbagging their homes. So I want to share with you a few ways that we can apply some smart planning and understanding of cumulative effects in our watersheds to minimize this damage as we go into the future. So one of the things that we know is that the amount of rain we get every year is going to change all the time. And scientists are telling us that with climate change, that variability is going to fluctuate more and more. And in fact, some recent work that I was doing with hydrologists and climate scientists, we were doing a land use study here in southern British Columbia, and just applying that sort of Paris level of global circulation model forcings, looking into the future for southern BC, we expect to have warmer but also very much wetter winters. And our spring runoff, the peak flow in our streams and watersheds, could easily be 50% or 75% higher within 25 to 30 years. So we're going to have to deal with this more and more and more. So what can we do about that? The first thing we need to do is understand that our watersheds are holistic systems. They're not a bunch of components like agriculture or forestry or just the river acting independently. It's really the combination of all of those components. I'm standing here on the Salmon River and it's flowing pretty high. And it's been raining here a lot, but the water isn't coming from the rain that's hitting me. This water is coming from the headwaters up at the top of the watershed. So we need to understand that the flow of the river down here where all the people are and where the infrastructure is, the flow in the river is the cumulative effect of all of the different things that are happening upstream from here. How much water is falling all through the watershed and how quickly that water is moving through the watershed down into this river. And that's influenced by a lot of different things. So one of the things that we can do is we can make sure that our wetlands are in good condition, or if they're not, we can restore them. The reason is wetlands act like giant sponges. And we often have wetlands not just in the bottoms of valleys, but up high on the slopes. They're sort of like little dampers. As the water's coming down the mountains, they slow down the flow, they suck up the water, and they release it a little bit later in the year when we need it more. Not to mention all the benefits of purifying the water and creating habitat. But in terms of managing peak flows like this, they're one tool that can really slow down the movement of water out of the headwaters in a watershed. A second thing that we can do is to take special care with our floodplains and where they've already been impacted to work hard to restore them. So floodplains allow a river along its journey to its destination, in this case, Shuswap Lake. A floodplain allows a river to spill over its channelized banks. And what happens then is you just start to disperse the energy of the river laterally instead of just up and down. And so when we do that, we slow down the river. We take away a lot of that momentum. So as it's ripping down here, it really hasn't had any chance to slow down anywhere, because with agriculture and roads and human settlement, other things that we've done, we've confined this river to a very narrow channel. And so it has very little opportunity to spill out, although now it's getting to high flood stage and it's spilling over its banks. And that's causing a lot of harm. It's causing a lot of damage. So if we identify some important areas that are good functioning floodplains, or we work to restore those areas and allow this river to spill its banks when it's high like this, it's going to slow it down and it's going to eliminate a lot of the damage if we can control where it's going to flood, rather than just having it flood away on us out of our control. A third thing we can do is we really modify the movement of water across a watershed with roads. And so what often happens is we tend to camber a road so it leans into the hill. And what that does though is when the water comes down, it catches the water on the uphill side of the road. And then we move it along the side of the road in a ditch to a culvert and let it through. But we often have quite a wide spacing on those culverts because culverts are expensive. So when there's a big rain event, we can trap a lot of water on the uphill side of the road. And if you get enough of that for long enough, that's how one of the primary ways that we get washouts, which of course lead to landslides and all kinds of other things. One way we can change the engineering of that is to slope our roads downhill rather than into the hill, and allow the water more opportunity to cascade off of the road surface and down the hill rather than being trapped above it. Of course, we can also install more water bars and more culvert drainage structures to move so that the water isn't being trapped above the road for as long of a distance. That will certainly help. But even just changing the camber of the road and allowing the water that's hitting that to at least disperse and get off of the road downhill rather than being trapped, that would make a big difference. And a fourth way, which is a new way that hydrologists and foresters, scientists are looking at, I think holds a lot of promise for our mitigation of the potential future effects of climate change, and that's desynchronizing our watersheds. So what do I mean by that? Well, in some recent work that I just completed on land use in a watershed near here, we looked at what the potential implications of climate change will be for flows in a main stem river. And we found by applying a sort of a middle of the road global circulation model forcing forecast, it's kind of similar to the Paris Accord agreement. If we were to achieve that, how much would that change the average flow in main stem rivers into the future? And we found it's actually quite significant. In the watershed here in southern British Columbia that we tested, we could easily see the average hydrograph being 25 to 30% higher than it is today, the peak flow. And then with increasing variability around that, it could be 75 or 80% higher than what we know as peak flow over the last 100 years that we've been measuring. So that's a big increase in flow. And then another thing that's happening is the models suggest that that water is going to come down earlier in the year, maybe a month to 6 weeks earlier than it has historically. So we're going to get more flow, and it's going to maybe be coming a lot faster, because when you move it earlier in the year, what you tend to get is more of these rain on snow events, which lead to really fast increase in flow in our rivers and streams. So it looks like we're going to have to deal with that in the future. And so one thing that we can do though is control how much energy is getting onto that snowpack in the springtime. And we can do that. One of the neat ways we can do that is through the use of forest management. So forestry harvesting opens up parts of the watershed, and it changes the timing of when that runoff happens. And so if we think ahead a little bit, instead of having a whole bunch of large openings, say all facing southwest, and sort of increasing that potential runoff early in the year, what we might be able to do is disperse the harvesting a little more across slopes, up and down elevations, across different parts of our watershed, so that we change the timing of the meltwater, and we can spread it out a little bit, and that will bring down that hydrograph, or at least the peak of it. So when we're having an extreme event or a very high flow year like we are this year, it won't be as high. So we really need to be looking at our watersheds as the cumulative effects of all human land uses and Mother Nature in combination, because that's reality. And as we continue to move forward with increasing land use and changes in our climate, we're going to need to think better, plan better, and be able to anticipate and adapt better. Or else I fear we'll have a lot more harm and a lot more damage in the future. The good news is that we have solutions, and there are things that we can do now. So there's 4 good ways that we can do it. Take care of our wetlands, care for or reclaim our floodplains and allow our rivers to slow down. Another great benefit of that is that they'll suck up water for late in the summer when the river is low and then release it back into the river. Nice cool water for the fish that are coming home to spawn. Third way is to do our best not to trap water above a road, especially in ditches, and run water for long distances in those uphill side ditches. Let's move that water across the road right away as soon as possible. And lastly, let's look at innovative planning that looks at a whole basin and allows us to maybe take advantage of our understanding of how watershed dynamics work and desynchronize the meltwater timing within our basin so that we can lower peak flow, so that when we're having a big event like we are this year, the damage won't be so great.